Hey, Bridget, let me know if you get the sound check. Bridget, let me know that you get the sound check. I see you. All right. Does it sound okay? All right. So, um, I did want to play something before we get started that I just found over on Twitter. Let me see if I can find it. Thank you, Bridget. Um, Hold on just a second and I'll share my screen if I can find it real quick. I know where I found. I think I saved it over here. All right. So let me go back to this, share my screen. I scare myself whenever I get too good at this. All right. So I'm going to go back to my note page, click on this link. I want y'all to listen to this. All right. So Bridget says y'all can't hear. I'm going to drop the link. Let me cut and paste the link. Let me get out of here. I'll tell you what he says. I'm going to take the link out of here and I'll drop it in the comments. Y'all have to listen to this after the show because basically what the guy is saying is this. I'm sure you have seen posted on the internet the $7.8 million profit that Trump made from foreign sources. First of all, it's not profit, it's revenue. That's pre-expensed out money coming in. That's number one. Number two, what they did was Trump Tower is right near the UN. So, of course, people will Airbnb out their suites in Trump Tower to foreign sources, or I guess some of them are for rent, and Trump makes money on them. So that's the foreign source for the comments that they're making about it. But if China bought a suite in Trump Tower, there's an HOA, and it's hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. Guess what they're counting as profit / revenue in that number that he supposedly made during his presidency. The HOAs on property that had been bought as early as 2001. It was not bought from 2016 to 2000 or to 2020. This is HOA, which you know is set in a separate account. Trump has no access to it at all. But given all of that, Eric Trump is on video saying, instead of arguing all of those points, Trump decided to write a check for $7.8 million and give it to the Treasury. So every time you see that comment from one of those leftist stooge heads, I want y'all to cut and paste, pin this thing so you can cut and paste it and say F you to every one of them that makes that comment. Cut and paste that link with that guy telling you what it is and just put those words, F you, per Elon Musk. That's my comment to every one of them. The guy does a great job of explaining how ridiculous that whole thing is. So, sorry I wimped out on y'all last night. I'm back home, but I did decide, since the sound seems to be much better for everybody in my command post, I'm going to start, until I get my cottage finished, I'm going to start doing the podcast from my command post with my MyPillow pillows. So, Fox can get rid of them, but I'm not going to. Chapter 18 starts off with the predators, and that's the name of the chapter. The first section is modeling scouts. So just kind of the cursory overview of this to set the stage. This chapter is going to be basically discussing the human trafficking aspect of everything that we've reviewed so far. So there's no exact date that Whitney could discover when you could like flip a switch and say this is when the human trafficking started. But what she did was say around the 1985 timeframe was the year that Wexner and Epstein met each other. And they were also affiliated with Robert Maxwell in Israeli intelligence. So that's kind of the genesis point. One accuser that in court documents has been referred to as Jane Doe number 2 accused Epstein of sexually assaulting and abusing and battering her in 1985. So that's kind of the earliest documented case. She was not underage. She was 23. Another one, Jane Doe number 1, said she was 14 and her abuse started in 1990. And by that time, he had already been affiliated with Ghislaine Maxwell. And keep in mind that Robert Maxwell was killed in 1991. I've got kind of a project that I want to do, because 1991 seems like such a pivotal year for so many things that I need to kind of go back and look, excuse me, at all the stuff that was happening with Operation Gladio, because that's when the unveiling, it started in the fall of 90, and the big bombshells happened in 91. And also that's when the Desert Storm 1 kicked off. So there just seems to be a lot of things that happened around the 91 timeframe that's all on this same, and some of the stuff that Bridget and I dug up on the WWF also happened in 91. So it's just something that we need to pay attention to. Patterns. Okay. So the details of the abuse suffered by the earliest victims are scarce. There's not a lot of information about it. It definitely was all hooked to the modeling industry, where you have Ford, F-O-R-D, is a modeling agency. One of their models, Eva Anderson Dubin, D-U-B-I-N. I believe she's the one that's hiding her name. She was a Swedish citizen. She now has US citizenship and she lives over here, but they still have a home in Sweden. She is former Miss Sweden. And she also, for about 10 years, dated Epstein. So she is, it's said that through the Ford modeling agency is how she hooked up with Epstein to begin with. And the Jean-Luc Brunel, Brunel, is another key person there. And he was kind of the in the modeling industry. Brunel first became prominent in the industry in his native France in the 1980s. His work at Karin Models Agency, Karin, in Paris, which he supposedly co-founded that modeling agency. It launched the careers of many successful models, and also there was like a nightclub scene where young women would parade themselves in front of him, trying to get his attention. He had lively parties at his apartment near the headquarters. Guardian reported that his apartment also housed a succession of younger models, many in their teens, who arrived from the US and elsewhere in Europe trying to get a break into the modeling industry. They found that they were expected to share bedrooms and to keep Brunel and his male friends company. Anyone who declined not only didn't get modeling work, he basically abandoned them. In 1988, Brunel was featured in a 60 Minutes expose. It said that other predatory modeling scouts had invited younger age girls, many as young as 15 and 16 years old, to Paris with promises of glamorous modeling careers. Girls interviewed for the report accused Brunel of sexually assaulting after he drugged them. Another girl who was 19 at the time said he sabotaged her career because she rejected his advances. Sounds like Weinstein. These guys have a lot in common. Brunel teamed up with Faith Kates, Kates, to form Next Models, NEXT, which became one of the most respected agencies in the industry. Kates claimed to have met Epstein through a mutual friend in the 1980s, but claims that they lost touch, which is later disproven. And Kates claims Epstein was seen meeting with her in the late 1980s and was regularly seen at Nex's office during the supposed time when they were not in touch. Nex founding and through much of the 1990s, Brunel and his brother Arnaud, Arnaud, owned about 25% of the agency. Arnaud was also employed by Next as a consultant, where he was paid a base salary of $30,000 a year plus 3% of their revenue. Kates, in a 1996 lawsuit, alleged that Brunel and his brother Arnaud basically had control of the Florida Next office. Kates had sued the Brunels, accusing them of attempting to set up a rival agency, basically using that same name in Florida. Just so happens to be right near where Jeffrey Epstein lived. Brunel opened New York and Miami branches of Karin Models. Brunel had taken over Karin Models in 1995, 1 year before the lawsuit. Expanded it into the U.S. with modeling agent Joey Hunter. That's a weird name. He reportedly first met and became friends with Jeffrey Epstein. They were allegedly introduced to Ghislaine. And Maxwell is said to have met Brunel in the 1980s in connection with work she did with her father, Robert Maxwell. Also, Ghislaine has French citizenship, so there's also that connection because Betty Maxwell, her mother, is French. So, Another French modeling guy is said to have said Jean-Luc is considered a danger, presumably to young women and aspiring models. Between 95 and 99, Brunel rented an apartment in Trump Tower where owner Donald Trump was at that time affiliating with Epstein. Brunel was forced to leave Trump Tower because of his antics late at night with beautiful women. Epstein's relationship was with both Brunel and Cates was unaffected by their split and the lawsuit. So Epstein kept them both in his orbit. Epstein was seen at Cates' Next model constantly in the early 2000s, and a former Next employee reported being pulled into a meeting with Epstein in the New York offices. One former Next employee also told the Daily Beast, I would only see him come in and go straight to her office. It was always like, get Jeffrey Epstein on the phone. So they had obviously a very close relationship. And that's from multiple people that were around them at the time. Epstein dated Next models, including Alina Puscau, Pasca, who he later arranged to work for Victoria's Secrets as an angel. Next model, another Next model that he dated became a real estate agent, and her name has been withheld from the press, so we don't even know who that is. There's another one that was in his book that also we don't know her name, but Epstein Butler's noted annotation in there was that she gave visitor massages. So the Faith Cates from the modeling agency, Next, is also seen, flew on his aircraft and was also seen in public as he escorted her to different events. So they were seen in public often. Epstein's secret charity organization was called Gratitude America Limited, which would make you think that it's probably somehow associated with the Limited, because that's a very unusual name for a charity. It donated considerable amount of money to Cates linked charities, as well as to an organization where her son, Dylan Kogan, Kogan, was employed. Epstein's Gratitude America was previously mentioned when we went over chapter 11, also donated a charity associated with Julian Leese, Leese, which is the son of Douglas Leese. And we talked about him throughout this whole book. They also donated to his former girlfriend, Eva Anderson Dubin. Brunel split with Cates and Next Models. After he split, his ties to Epstein grew a lot bigger. Brunel would fly regularly, at least over 20 times on the flight log that has been released so far. He stayed at his house. During his time in prison, he visited Epstein over 70 times. So that's huge. He was also very close to Ghislaine Maxwell. Brunel was still running Karen Models, which according to a former employee was barely profitable. And to keep it afloat, there were cash infusions from Brunel's brother Arnaud and their business partner, a guy by the name of Etienne, Etienne, Des, Des, Roys, Roys. Both later dumped Jean-Luc Brunel in 2003, putting his entire operation in peril. So both of those modeling agencies. In 2004, Epstein was seeking to gain his own entrance into the modeling industry, but it failed. And his entity was called Elite Models. So the same year that Karen Models sued Brunel and made him stop using Karen trademark is when they tried to launch the Jeffrey Epstein Elite Models. In 2005, Brunel rebranded his agencies in the US under the name MC2. Epstein created a new company that was registered at that Villard house where his office was in New York City that we talked about at the beginning. And it was he offered Brunel $1 million line of credit. The line of credit was basically Epstein's trying to recruit Brunel into a joint venture with a new modeling agency called Elite Paris. That venture fell through once reports surfaced that Epstein was in the sex trafficking business. However, MC2's business continued unimpeded even though Epstein was no longer in it. It just wasn't going to be the Elite Paris one fell through, but MC2, which also he was affiliated with, kept going. Brunel claimed Epstein ordered him to leave Florida, and so he went to Europe and Asia for a time while he was going through the legal problems. It seems that Epstein also offered Brunel another $1 million line of credit to get MC2 back on its feet the same year he sought to go into business with Elite Paris. MC2's bookkeeper, Marita Vasquez, in a sworn statement said in 2010, Epstein had guaranteed a line of credit of $1 million for MC2 that directly paid for visas of models brought to the US to work for the company. So basically, that's the sex trafficking. They are paying foreign women to come in under the guise of modeling. So Brunel's significance to Epstein's sex trafficking activities kept growing. So Vasquez, the bookkeeper, also testified that teenage models that Brunel flew in to work for MC2, whose visa had been paid for by Epstein, were housed at that same 301 66th Street apartment complex that was basically, for lack of a better word, a whorehouse that it keeps coming up over and over. That's where a lot of the people that we talked about before, several chapters back, was stashed, and it's also very close to I think this is the one that's located right behind the Watergate complex that was there in Washington, D.C. So OSSA Properties is who owned that apartment building. And remember, they had leased out some of them, but some of them hadn't been leased out. And people were saying there was young women going back and forth in them. That building and the property management is in the name of his brother, Mark Epstein. Vasquez stated that the girls were loaned out to wealthy clients for as much as $100,000 a night. If they refused to have sex with the client, then they weren't paid. Brunel denies this, but they are notably corroborated by most well-known Epstein victim, Virginia Roberts Joffrey. In 2014 court filing, Virginia alleged that Brunel offered girls modeling jobs, in quotations. Many of the girls came from poor countries, and he lured them with the promise of making good money. She has also alleged that she was forced to have sex with Brunel on several occasions. She also stated that Epstein imported underage girls from France with his assistants, including 12-year-old triplets that he flew in from France so that he could abuse them as a birthday present to himself. That was Brunel. Epstein maintained a residence in Paris in a very ritzy area, and there's basically been no reporting on what happened while he was there as far as sightings or anything like that. There's almost no uh, evidence or reporting on any of his activities while he was in Paris. Another girl brought into the Epstein fold by Brunel was Nadia Markinova, Marcinkova. It is actually alleged that she was bought by Epstein from her family in Eastern Europe when she was 14 years old. She never worked as a model. She was basically his sex slave and subsequently accused of aiding his sex trafficking operation by recruiting underage girls. So basically, she was one of those um, people that was indoctrinated into this lifestyle and uh, it's kinda I guess, the only way I could describe it is like being in a cult where you don't even recognize what you're doing is wrong because it's all you've ever known. Um, so for whatever it's worth, I feel sorry for all of these people. So she basically becomes like a recruiter. She participates in sexual activity with Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein. All of that's been testified to. In 2011, a few years later, after Epstein's first stint in prison, Marcinkova founded a company called AV Loop, AVILOOP, and it supposedly is an aviation branding business. Business records listed the address at that OSA property apartment complex that his brother owns. Brunel's role in Epstein's sex trafficking operation can be seen in memos seized at his Palm Beach house. And there were notes taken by the staff. He would call and leave messages. One of the messages is, quote, he, meaning Brunel, has a teacher for you to teach you Russian. She is 2 by 8 years old, not blonde. And there was discussion in court on whether it was 2 8-year-olds or a 16-year-old, and that was just a way to code the message. Either way, it's gross. Epstein is believed to have had many underage victims, photographed in the nude, pictures hanging all over his Palm Beach mansion. That's been documented in several different places. Also, there was testimony that he had clocks that had his hidden cameras in them that the girls were told about and testified to that being the case. Um, Just Lane actually admitted that the Palm Beach house, the New York house, and the Island house were all completely wired for video. And that Maxwell, and Epstein were videotaping everyone on the island as an insurance policy as blackmail, unquote. More on the hidden camera hard drive aspect, which we talked about before in a previous chapter. None of that's come out. Supposedly, when they raided the uh, house in New York City, they left it, and then when they came back the next day, it was gone. Sure. But they did collect a lot of the documentation, the video stuff from the island house, and we've never seen any of that. That's what I wanna see. Screw the list. I want to know the video content. Not that I actually wanna see it. I want it known, and I want somebody to have looked at that and tell us who's on it and how that all plays into this entire thing. and I want him held accountable. Epstein also had connections to prominent fashion designers. Tom Ford of the Ford Agency was listed in Epstein's book. He's the creative director of Gucci, and he was there from 94 to 2004, which would have been through all of this. Ford has been routinely criticized for using naked women or crudely objectifying women in his ad campaigns. Ford is listed alongside longtime and recently deceased partner Richard Buckley. Buckley was a well-known fashion journalist and wrote in magazines like Vogue and Vanity Fair. Other people in the contact book that ties into this whole network was Janice Dickinson, Naomi Campbell, Chris Royer, and Heidi Klum, Klum. They were all named by victims having flown on the private plane, and some of them were in Victoria's Secret. Epstein repeatedly used his connection to Victoria's Secret as basically a hook, promising these girls that he would get them in as modeling as part of that. He used that kind of as a hook. And on this topic of Victoria's Secrets, while Epstein was involved in Next Models and Jean-Luc Brunel was becoming increasingly involved in the Wexner-owned lingerie brand Victoria's Secrets. Wexner had acquired Victoria's Secrets in '82, well before Epstein came on the scenes. The previous owner, Roy Raymond, was on the verge of bankruptcy. So by the time Epstein linked up with Brunel in '95, Victoria's Secrets had started its iconic lingerie fashion show. It ended in 2019, and it was basically ran by L Brand's chief marketing officer, a guy by the name of Ed Razek, Razek. He appears in Epstein's Black Book and was later accused of inappropriate behavior towards company models. Imagine that. So, basically, Epstein was known to use his status within the Wexner complex to abuse or attempt to abuse several of the Victoria's Secret women. Former models recounted that Epstein portrayed himself as a scout, even the owner of the brand. Oh, one of the women, Alicia Arden, Arden, who reportedly was assaulted by Epstein in 1997 after being invited to audition. Another Elizabeth Tay, Tay, was introduced to Epstein by a booking agent and was told he's the most important person in modeling to know. Tay would later report that Epstein was going to change her life, and once she met him, she tried to show him her portfolio, but instead he tried to assault her, but she was able to leave. 3 other models subsequently testified in a court case that basically he had done the same thing to them. Jane Doe number 3 was brought in to Epstein by a friend who described him as a caring man who could help with her modeling career, and she too was sexually assaulted. So obviously we see what's going on. So I don't want to go through all of those details, but that's kind of the whole thing. And Ghislaine Maxwell also was involved as time went on. She would be one calling the women. She would try to lure them into and help him set up the whole Victoria's Secret scam. And let's see. According to a former CEO of Victoria's Secret's Direct, Cindy Fetus Fields, an executive entered her office in 93 to tell her that Epstein, then Wexner's money manager, had been posing as a modeling recruiter. I asked this executive to call Les directly and tell him what was happening. She did, and Les told her that he'd put a stop to it. Obviously, that didn't happen. And so, next category after Victoria's Secrets was what Ghislaine Maxwell referred to as gallerinas. So, the Slosby and Christie's auction houses, and we talked about them a little bit in a previous chapter. Those involve Wexner and Alfred Tubman, Taubman, and that whole mega group. Remember that they actually bought Slosby's as an auction house, as a quote unquote investment, as part of that mega group. Billionaire club that they belong to in New York City. So Maxwell would go around to these art houses, museums, art shows, and she would try to pick up young artists because they're all struggling financially, um, potentially vulnerable, and she used going to the auctions and, these art galleries as a place to recruit these women. So, she would use the fact that they're interested in photography and, the whole modeling thing. She let's see, she suggests that the lack of photography made so in the museums, because you're not allowed to take pictures in the museums, in the majority of them, it was the perfect place to go pick people up without getting caught picking people up. How convenient is that? So, Epstein and Maxwell sought gallerinas at the art show in New York, also specifically the New York Academy of Art, which was a school. The most well-known Epstein victim recruited from the art world was Maria Farmer. First encountered Epstein while she was a student at that academy. Epstein served on the academy board from 87 to 94, because of course he did. Epstein reportedly bought a painting from Maria Farmer at a gallery show tied to her graduation, and she then was employed by Epstein beginning in 1995. After he had promised to help her with her career, Epstein had originally promised her work in acquiring art on his behalf. She was going to be like an art buyer. But she also spent time working in other capacities and managing the entrance to one of his New York properties. She and her then underage sister, Annie Farmer, were subsequently abused and targeted by Epstein as well as Maxwell. Maria Farmer has accused Eileen Guggenheim, then dean of the academy and current chairman of the board, of facilitating and enabling Epstein's predatory behavior towards her and other people there. Epstein also had a close relationship with Stuart Pivar, Pivar, who was a co-founder of the academy. And this goes along with what I was telling you when we got to the part about where William Barr's dad, Donald Barr, worked at that exclusive school. Those schools are known. If you look up elite boarding school or elite prep school with scandal, just that, you will find there are so many reported incidences in those private schools of the staff sleeping with the kids there. And in many cases, the parent knows and does nothing about it. It's like they know that it's a breeding ground for uh, perverts. So that's crazy. And evidently, the art schools are not much different. Also, It was said that in one interview, Epstein sought to collect art that had shock value, which would explain the naked people in the art, or the Clinton and the Bush art. That definitely had shock value. Epstein attempted to recruit young female musicians at a place called Interlochen Center for the Arts in Michigan, which he had once attended as a teen. They even had a Jeffrey Epstein Scholarship Lodge that was located close to a junior girls' camp. And he hosted fundraisers and events for Interlochen alumni at his New York house and townhouse. The guy was just such a sleazeball. And all of these people, this is what you need to keep in mind as we go through this. Was Epstein's uncle was an artist popular in Europe. There you go. And so they would use all of these ends as the lead in to recruit these underage women. But keep in mind that every single place he went, every event he went to, everybody that was in those events, and the same with Maxwell, knew what he was doing. You heard Cindy McCain say, we all knew. They all knew. And they did nothing to save these young girls because they're all perverts. Okay, an unidentified woman sued Epstein's estate in January 2020, claiming that Epstein and Maxwell recruited her from Interlochen when she was 13 years old. She was reportedly approached by Epstein and Maxwell while sitting alone between classes. Tells you a little bit about that, but that's just gross. Nadia Bjorlin, Bjorlin, was also 13 when Epstein and Maxwell attempted to groom her at Interlochen. Her father had recently died before she attended, and her mother told the Daily Beast in 2011 that Epstein was a big donor and heard that about Nadia and that her father had died, so that she was vulnerable, and he reached out and contacted her. Here's my number. When Bjorlin met Epstein and asked what he wanted with her daughter, he promised that he only wanted to help her singing career and be like a godfather. She was uncomfortable with Epstein from that point on and never let her daughter alone in a room with him. At least one mom. Epstein and Maxwell also attempted to recruit a cellist, Melissa Solomon, at Interlochen when she was 14. She was never abused by them, but she also was asked to be a recruiter for them, which she refused to do when she was at New York's Juilliard School. And she also declined an offer to meet Prince Andrew. Epstein also attempted to recruit attendees at Juilliard. The year he contacted the school looking for a young dance instructor, and one attendee of the school obliged. She was flown to Palm Beach to teach dance classes to his guests, two Swedish models, one of which was the Eva Anderson Dubin. That's how she got involved. Epstein had enticed her to continue working for him by offering to pay for her senior year at Juilliard and donate to the school. But I guess he never made the donation. That was just another lie. Broken promises. So basically, this next section goes through several of the iterations of him, like in the 2021 criminal case against Maxwell, minor 4, who testified under her first name Carolyn, was a victim of Jeffrey Epstein in Florida, who was sexually abused by him up to 3 times a week for several years. She testified that Maxwell routinely called her to schedule massages, which was basically a name for sex. Carolyn was only 14 when Epstein began to abuse her, and that she would receive several $100s after having sex with him or him doing whatever he did in front of her. And she said that he molested her over 100 times between 2001 and 2004 in Palm Beach. And they go through several of these. They also paid to take nude photographs of her, that a co-conspirator, Sarah Keller, would be taking the pictures. So I just want to kind of go through this and give you the highlights, because this can get gross. Jesseline would take them on shopping trips and spend lots of money on them and basically just groom them. Jesseline is the one that spent a lot of time with them and would compliment them, but at the same time, she'd be trashing them behind her back to Maxwell's ritzy friends, which they found out later. And let's see. Just trying to go through the rest of these to see if there's any other highlights. That pretty much takes all of the, I mean, there's a whole bunch of them. I'm just not going to go through all of them. There's a mix of whether they were, like some of them were 22, 23. A lot of them were teenagers. Haley Robson, Robson, was 16, and just lots of them. And then the next section is basically Jesseline Maxwell with lots of examples of her saying, "They're nothing, these girls." That's a quote from her, where she takes them and does all of this stuff, tells them how beautiful they are, takes them on shopping trips. At one point, they're trying to dress them up like a schoolgirl outfit to entertain Epstein, and all just part of the whole grooming process. But then at the same time, there are um, people that give the description, like his former butler and other people that were working on the staff at the time, saying that when she was alone with her friends, she could be overheard talking very derogatory about how trashy the girls were and that they were basically nothing. So they're just to be used. Under the area of accomplices, they basically go over, most of y'all know about these already, but they talk about several of the people that had helped with this whole network. And Sarah Kellen, Kellen, is one of them. She was an employee. She basically was Jesseline's assistant. There's another one, Sarah Ransom, Ransome, Ransom. She's alleged that um, to have been involved in the whole sexual thing, but also as a recruiter. And let's see. A lot of them, and that's what goes on in this one. A lot of them, like Jeffrey Epstein's, the Eva, what's her face, they end up getting married off to very wealthy men. So it's almost kind of like I don't, this isn't going to come out right, but I in my head it's like an analogy thing. It's like a farm. So they groom these women, and in the grooming process, one they're kind of like rank ordered. One can just be for sex and to mess with, and then you cultivate another group of them that may come from a better background, or they're just better finished. He would then pay for them to go to school. The Eva, he finished paying for her medical school. One of them, he trained to be a pilot, and they would cultivate them and then marry them off. Now, think about this for just a second. If you're in the blackmail business and you're grooming these people from the time that they're 13 or 14 years old to be kind of your loyal in person, that thought about watch the wives, well, it may be because they were producing the wives. These wives could have been their bug in the room, because oftentimes they would be seen later on. And because now those wives are going to invite the Epsteins and the Maxwell and the people in that mega group into events that it's going to allow them to see the insides of stuff. And the one, Eva, uh, the Swedish girl, she married a hedge fund manager, and he was all, I mean, he's now a billionaire. So you think about it, is she such like a brainwashed part of this whole process where she's going to share potential business deals and everything else? You see that network. So you've got wave one of the network, wave two of the network, wave three of the network, where they're basically kind of a eHarmony matchmaking thing. And if you bring those people in and you compromise them and make them marry one of the people that's in this network, then they're stuck with them, right? So now they're just permanently compromised. I honestly think that's kind of what's going on here, because when you start putting all of these pieces together, it's very interesting. So another one is Claire Hassel, Hazell. She gets married off to the Guinness family, a guy by the name of Edward Guinness, who is an earl. And the last name of the earldom, or whatever you call it, Iveahgh, sorry, Eve. She becomes Claire Eve upon their marriage in 2001. She was with Epstein throughout the 90s. Not a lot is known about her other than the fact that she was involved, and she was sought by federal investigators as she was believed to have knowledge of the illegal activities of Maxwell. She appears on the flight logs 32 times. She's in Epstein's black book under her marriage. And she was basically a co-conspirator in the sex trafficking part of this whole network. She also appears to have been brought into Epstein's world during her time at Ohio State, which makes sense because that's right there in Columbus. She was heavily funded, the school was heavily funded by Les Wexner. And she reportedly had a modeling agency that she opened in Columbus. So she's going to be a recruiter too. So again, this is just crazy. And once you understand how the network began and how it continues to multiply, you see just how evil this whole thing is. So the next section actually talks about some of the girlfriends for these rich and famous people. One of the women, Frances Jardine, Jardine, we came across that when that family was intricately involved in the Asia drug trade, the Jardines. So she was a former model from South Africa and had a relationship with Epstein in 1990. She flew on the plane 12 times. She also accompanied Epstein to the White House alongside Eva Anderson Dubin. And she also spent some time at that Osa property that was owned by Epstein's brother. And so in an interview, she said about Epstein, he tried to expose me to a larger world, open my mind, and stimulate my belief in myself that I could be many things, as I was sorely lacking in true confidence when I first met him. I asked Jeffrey for help. He was many things to me over the years, trying to address the various areas that were holding me back as a human being. Just makes me sick. Helping me find my way into a future that would suit my level of sensitivity and proclivity to jump into relationships too quickly. He wanted me to develop skills and share the importance of making the right choices. People around me misinterpreted my relationship with him because he was definitely more way out than their average man's idea of what a woman could be or should be to a man. Yeah, totally brainwashed. It's like a cult. So, she would be married off to John Deuss, Deuss, and he's the oil trader that was involved with Mark Rich and Ted Shackley, the CIA guy. So, again, another key placement of one of these women into a network that they would want to get information on. Deuce, like Epstein and Khashoggi and others in their network, had a reputation for using beautiful young women, usually models, to secure favors and loyalty, i.e., blackmail from business associates. Other women Epstein dated while dating Jardin and Maxwell was Selena Middleford. And she was another one that went to the White House with Epstein when he was meeting with Mark Middleton. And let's see, she supposedly left Epstein and began dating Donald Trump for a short period of time. And so obviously many of these women were paraded through the White House for whatever reason. And many of the people that had been serving in the White House, Bill Richardson, Robert Rubin, and Larry Summers, all were in Epstein's contact book. And some of them had these witnesses that actually said they had sex with them. So George Mitchell, you remember him, he came up. His son had been tied to the Hawaiian big donors in the DNC. That George Mitchell basically got a payoff. And so also Nicole Junkermann of Germany, she was represented by that elite model management in 1995. There's also Naomi Campbell that came in, and Epstein did help Junkermann attend Harvard. So now this is where it gets kind of interesting. You have Junkermann, who ended up escorting wealthy older men to social events, including Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen, whose ties to Maxwell's siblings are going to be discussed in another chapter, but I will tell you that Maxwell's siblings, Isabel, primarily, they're twins, but primarily Isabel, became involved in the software industry as a follow-on to her dad's involvement in the software promise. She is working on behalf of Israel. She is hired by as an Israeli firm. They sell software, and now you have to keep in mind that the promise software that we discussed earlier tells you that the CIA and the Mossad creates back doors to software program, and they sell it to countries unknowing to those countries so they can spy on them. Now, what we're about to learn in this chapter and in next chapter is that Isabel Maxwell owned software programs that sold software, different versions, different things, capabilities like email or an operating system for a particular aspect of the Microsoft suite. She was doing that at some point as the CEO of an Israeli owned Mossad Unit 8200, which is their like DARPA CIA kind of entity. They basically owned the company that she was the CEO of. So we already know that they modify software to spy on people. Now, why this is extremely important, and I want y'all to remember this when everything keeps happening as we go forward. Microsoft, obviously, they have some holdover Bill Gates. Some, I don't know, maybe compromising material, something. There, right now, we're going to get into his partner in founding Microsoft. What's really important here is she's going to be selling the software that's affiliated with the state of Israel, and keep in mind they spy on the US a lot, to Microsoft. Microsoft is going to, in some cases, buy this capability when it's not even makes any sense for them to buy it, number one. But Microsoft has 100% of the computer software capability for the entire United States government. It was not until after I retired that you were even allowed to have an Apple as part of a purchase from the government. You had to have everything that ran on Microsoft. You can have a Mac computer, nothing. Everything had to be compatible with Microsoft. And now we find out that the entire Microsoft infrastructure potentially is compromised by Israel using the promise model. So just keep that in mind. I'm giving you that kind of frame of reference as we continue. So Junkerman also flew on Epstein's plane several times. She accompanied him to she was the one, if you guys remember the area where we have 2 US senators that were not named that went over and was put up for the night. She was one of the girls that was given to the 2 senators, her and a blonde. So Junkerman later became a business partner in an Epstein-funded company chaired by his close associate and the former Prime Minister of Israel, Enoch Barak. That company is Carbine 911 and formerly known as Reporty. It was closely associated with Israeli intel, and at the time, Junkerman served on the board. In 2017, she married an Italian aristocrat, Count Fernando Maria Barchetti Peretti, who was the CEO of an Italian energy giant, API Group. Now, the Barchetti Peretti family, like Francis Jardin's former husband, John Deuce, would have long involvement in the global oil industry. So, you also have another even higher up on the pecking order of these subgroups of women, Melanie Walker. Melanie Walker is now a neurosurgeon. She met Epstein in 92. Soon after she graduated from college, she was offered a Victoria's Secret modeling job. She then stayed at a New York apartment building that was associated with Epstein's trafficking operations, that OSA property that his brother owned. And she graduated from medical school in 98. She became Epstein's science advisor for a year. And she had grown so close to Prince Andrew that she attended the Windsor Castle birthday celebration hosted by the Queen alongside Epstein and Maxwell. So she was the cream of the cream. So she also was taken to the Zorro property out in New Mexico, and she was known to keep Andrew company. So that's interesting. Walker moved to Seattle and began living with then Microsoft executive Stephen Sakofsky, who now serves as a board partner in a venture capital firm, uh, Anderson and Horowitz. And Anderson is spelt the same way that the other chick's name is. So they're, again, such a small knit of people that they're basically farming these women out to. So now we've got another woman that's getting married off to Microsoft and then on to a venture capital fund. And we've already went over how they use the venture capital funds in this whole scheme. So Maxwell also got very close to Bill Gates and Paul Allen during this time. And Anderson Horowitz also has financial interest in the Carbine 911 Israeli company that she served on the board with. So they also backed another group that the former Prime Minister Barack led called TOKA, TOKA. TOKA recently won contracts with the government for Moldova, Nigeria, and Ghana, all through the World Bank, where Melanie Walker is currently a director and former special advisor to its president. It's unclear when and how or under what circumstances Walker met Sakofsky. After moving to Seattle to be with Sakofsky, sorry, these names drive me crazy. After a brief stint as a practitioner in the developing world, those are quotes from her resume, in China with the World Health Organization, Walker was hired as a senior program manager by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So now we've got somebody on the inside of that. Walker introduced Boris Nikolic, Gates' science advisor, to Epstein. Today, Melanie Walker is the co-chair of the WEF Global Future Council of Neurotechnology and Brain Science, having previously been named one of their young global leaders. Walker also advises the World Health Organization. Former employees and alleged co-conspirators of Epstein were either aided or their careers basically paid for by this whole network, or in some cases, after having serviced Epstein, they're married off to these rich and famous people. And many of them were married off to people in areas that he was heavily invested in. So that's the end of that chapter. That's going to be the end of today. That's what we're not going to go any further. That's all of chapter 18. We will start with chapter 19 tomorrow, and that's the Prince and the President. So that's going to be a very interesting one because we are going to talk about Prince Andrew, and it's going to get a little crazy, but it's a very good chapter. That's the former Israeli, the colonel just mentioned. Yeah. Yes, exactly, War Hamster, and thank you, War Hamster, for being here. He's my buddy. We were on the phone earlier about, a lot of different topics, and do hope to have another opportunity in the near future to, talk about a bunch of different things. He specializes, he comes from the banking world, and so we are going to, in the next couple of chapters, hit on the World Bank and how all of this ties. And I did mention, Bridget, I complimented you to War Hamster with the research that you did on the WWF and how all of that ties into the funding and I think with my background in Operation Gladio and his background on the money, where we could get a little bit deeper into the money laundering aspect of it, um, I I think that's going to paint a much better picture for all of us to see what's going on. I don't talk a lot about other than um, the fake banks that they set up and the fact that they are money laundering and all of the dead bodies associated with the banks, like Nugent Hand Bank in Australia, the Nugent guy gets killed, found dead in a car with the CIA director's business card laying on the seat. So that's about as far as I get because I don't have the financial expertise to talk more about that. But I do think the link between the Bank of International Settlements, the World Bank, and the funding of those different areas that tie to the World Wildlife Fund, because that's how they hook them. They issue these loans to them, they get these poor countries hooked with these world loans. And as we found when we did the research for the WWF, one of the ways that they can forgive the loans is give them that private land, those sanctuary preserves, which they then turn into terrorist training camps. And I want to do a much better job of painting that whole picture because it's obvious what was going on. They're issuing the loans out of the World Bank to impoverish these nations and then saying, "Oh, but look what we can do for you. You just give us that big area where all of the elephants are with their ivory tusk, and we're going to protect it." When in fact, what they do is go in there and harvest the ivory tusk, which we found when we dug into the WWF. So, anyway, um, that's what I got. Please give us a thumbs up, if you will, for the show and follow us if you're not already following us so that our podcast can get more visibility when people search for us in the search engine. I really appreciate it. And I will see you again tomorrow night. We're going to be talking about Prince Andrew at 7 o'clock. Thanks for being here.